This is also a time of change for my family.
The room did not explode with shouting. It collapsed into silence. One moment, Catherine was seated with calm composure before a private royal gathering. The next, Camilla entered, and everything changed. Catherine rose without asking permission, pushed back her chair, and walked out before a single formal greeting could be exchanged. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a statement. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine did not look back. She had entered Windsor believing the meeting would be difficult, but honest, and that belief broke the instant Camilla crossed the threshold. Windsor, the royal residence often used for private family decisions away from cameras, had been chosen because Charles wanted control, quiet, and distance from public pressure. The closed-door family consultation, meaning a private meeting where senior royals try to settle conflict before it spills outside palace walls, was supposed to calm a growing storm. Instead, it became the moment the storm found its voice. William stayed frozen beside the chair she left behind. The prince had assured Catherine this would be about unity, not pressure, not performance, and not another carefully arranged scene where pain was expected to smile for the sake of tradition. Yet the seating plan told another story. Catherine had already seen Camilla's name placed directly opposite her, not beside Charles, not away from the tension, but facing her like a test. That detail mattered, because royal seating is never random. It signals status, purpose, and the emotional script everyone is expected to follow. Camilla understood the meaning of that empty space the moment Catherine moved. The queen consort's face hardened, but she did not protest, because silence protected her better than denial. Charles watched the room lose balance in real time, his hand resting near a pen he no longer seemed able to lift. The king had wanted peace, yet he was staring at the cost of arranging peace without trust. Catherine's walkout said what no aide would dare say aloud. This meeting had not felt like reconciliation. It had felt like a trap. William finally turned toward Charles, and the question in his eyes was sharper than any speech. Why had Catherine been brought into a room without the full truth? Why had Camilla been allowed to enter after the meeting began, as if surprise could force dignity into surrender? No one answered quickly. No one could. The door had closed behind Catherine, but the silence she left behind stayed in the room like a verdict. But to understand why one entrance shattered the room, we must first understand what Catherine, Camilla, William, and Charles each stood to lose. Every royal crisis has public symbols, but this one had faces. Catherine's restraint, William's loyalty, Camilla's defiance, and Charles's impossible silence all collided in a room too small for old wounds. No crown, title, or protocol could soften what happened next. Behind the closed door, this was not about rank. It was about betrayal. Catherine carried years of quiet pressure into that meeting. She had smiled through storms, stood beside the family when silence was demanded, and accepted the burden of appearing calm even when the room around her felt unfair. Protocol, the royal system of rules for public and private behavior, had often asked her to keep the peace before anyone asked whether peace had cost her too much. That mattered, because Catherine's image was not only personal anymore, it had become part of the monarchy's future, and every slight against her now carried a deeper warning. Camilla entered with her own battle already burning. She believed the meeting would restore her place at the center of family decision-making, especially after weeks of watching Catherine's influence grow stronger, quieter, and harder to challenge. The queen consort, the wife of the king who holds a public royal position beside him, expected recognition, not resistance. Yet the moment she saw Catherine's hands resting on the chair, she knew the Princess of Wales was not preparing to negotiate. She was preparing to leave. William saw it before anyone else. His jaw tightened, but he did not speak at first, because the prince was realizing the truth in the worst possible way. Catherine had not been warned properly. She had entered that room believing Camilla would not be used as a sudden test of loyalty, and now William understood that his promise to protect her from pressure had been broken before he could stop it. His anger stayed controlled, but control did not make it less dangerous. Charles sat with the silence of a man who had approved a gathering without owning its full consequence. The king had allowed the meeting to happen, but he had not personally told Catherine that Camilla would enter after it began, and that omission changed everything. It made the room feel arranged. It made the moment feel planned. It made Catherine's exit feel less like shock and more like judgment. A senior aide later described, in a documented Palace account, the tiny movement that revealed the truth. Catherine's fingers tightened on the chair before she stood. She had decided before Camilla spoke. She had decided before Charles could explain. She had decided because betrayal had already entered before the queen consort did. And that ceremony, hidden beneath polite smiles and careful seating, became the spark that made Catherine's exit inevitable. The walkout did not begin when Camilla crossed the threshold. It began 3 nights earlier, during a private Windsor reception that should have passed without drama. Catherine had stood beside William, composed and gracious, until one sentence from Camilla changed the temperature of the evening. It was soft enough to be dismissed, sharp enough to be remembered forever. Catherine heard the words and felt the warning beneath them. The Windsor Restoration Reception, a private ceremony meant to honor future royal work and rebuild the family's public image, was supposed to mark her rising role with grace. A royal patronage is a public cause supported by a senior royal, often tied to charity, service, or national identity. That mattered because Catherine's expected role was not symbolic decoration. It connected children, heritage, and service to the next chapter of the monarchy, and it showed the public who the family trusted to carry warmth into the future. Camilla knew exactly where to place the blade. During the planned acknowledgement, she stepped into the pause and said that experience should guide visibility. The queen consort did not raise her voice, but she did not need to. Catherine understood the sentence as a challenge, not advice. Visibility meant who would stand forward, who would be named, who would be seen as the face of the family's future. And in that instant, Catherine realized the evening had shifted from celebration to quiet warning. William saw Catherine's expression change. The prince noticed the stillness in her smile, the way her face held together while something behind it broke. He wanted to speak, but he chose restraint because the room was public enough to punish any open reaction. That choice haunted him later. William had protected the ceremony, but not Catherine. He had protected the surface, but not the wound. Charles discovered the deeper cut after the reception ended. The king was handed a revised program card, and there it was. Catherine's name had been removed from the final closing remarks. A program card is the printed order of an event, showing who is recognized and when, and in royal settings, every name carries weight. Catherine had already seen the original version. She knew she had been edited out. She knew the softer phrase, "senior royal guidance," had replaced her moment. And Charles understood, too late, that someone had turned honor into humiliation. Camilla left the reception believing the balance had been restored. Catherine left, knowing the balance had been broken. William left with regret he could not explain away. By the time Camilla stepped into the room, Catherine was not facing a surprise guest. She was facing the person she believed had crossed the final line. The confrontation lasted less than a minute, but everyone present knew it would define the monarchy's private history. Catherine did not shout. Camilla did not apologize. William moved first, then stopped. Charles looked between them like a man watching two versions of his family collide. And then Catherine said the words that turned silence into judgment. Catherine had seen the empty chair before the door opened. It sat opposite her like a warning, waiting for Camilla before anyone had dared speak her name. The long table mattered because royal meetings are built around placement, and placement shows power, pressure, and intention. Charles sat at one end, trying to hold the room together. William sat beside Catherine, believing he had brought her into a difficult but honest conversation. Yet that empty chair told Catherine something different. It told her the confrontation had been prepared before she arrived. Camilla entered with calm control, but Catherine rose before the queen consort could settle the room with a greeting. "I will not be placed in this position again," she said, and the sentence cut through every excuse before anyone could shape one. Catherine's voice did not break. That made it worse. She was not confused. She was not reacting wildly. She was refusing a role that had been written for her without consent, and everyone at the table understood it. William turned toward her, then toward Charles. The prince saw Catherine's pain sharpen into resolve, and his own anger followed. He had promised her no ambush, no staged forgiveness, no private pressure dressed as family unity. Now he saw that the promise had been broken by the room itself. William stepped toward the door, then stopped, because the question had to be asked before Catherine's absence could be twisted into something smaller. Why had she not been told the truth? Camilla spoke only one word: Catherine. But there was no apology inside it. There was offense, pride, and a cold disbelief that the Princess of Wales had refused to sit down. The Queen Consort expected dignity to mean endurance. Catherine had just shown that dignity could also mean leaving. Charles set down his pen. The king did not defend the arrangement. He did not call Catherine back. He stared at the chair she had left behind, as if it had become evidence. A pen in royal discussions often marks approval, notes, or final decisions, and when Charles placed it down untouched, the meaning was brutal. The meeting had failed before it began. Catherine's exit left William inside the room with Camilla and Charles. But it also left him with a choice he could not avoid. And in the silence Catherine left behind, the real question became brutally clear. Who still held power inside this family? Power in the monarchy rarely announces itself. It appears in seating plans, altered programs, delayed phone calls, and doors opened at exactly the wrong time. After Catherine walked out, the room became less about hurt feelings and more about control. Charles had to face a truth he could no longer hide. Silence had become a decision. Charles had allowed the meeting because he believed privacy could stop the damage from spreading. He thought a controlled setting would keep family pain away from headlines, away from public judgment, away from the kind of open fracture the crown always feared. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution beyond one person, depends on the image of order. That mattered because Catherine's exit did not simply wound feelings. It threatened the story of unity the family had worked so hard to protect. Camilla believed she had every right to be there. The Queen Consort saw Catherine's future role as part of a wider royal balance, and she believed any discussion about visibility, duties, and influence should include her voice. Royal visibility means who appears most often before the public, and who becomes the emotional face of the family. For Camilla, losing that space meant losing more than attention. It meant watching Catherine become the figure people trusted when the palace needed warmth, grace, and quiet strength. William did not raise his voice, but his disappointment landed harder than anger. The prince looked at Charles, not only as the king, but as his father, and that made the silence more painful. He had expected honesty. He had expected protection. Instead, William saw Catherine placed inside a room where the truth had arrived late, and the person hurt most was the one asked to behave best. That was the wound he could not forgive quickly. Charles felt the trap close around him. If he defended Camilla, he ignored Catherine's humiliation. If he defended Catherine, he exposed Camilla's role in the crisis. The monarch had spent his life learning how to survive pressure, but this was different. This time the pressure came from the people closest to him, and every choice looked like a betrayal. A palace secretary later confirmed in a documented internal account that Catherine's name had been removed from the Windsor Restoration Reception Program after a late internal review. The same secretary admitted that Charles had only been told after the change was finalized, and that detail shook him. Camilla's circle had moved faster than the king's authority. Catherine's missing name and the arranged meeting were no longer separate mistakes. They were connected. The walkout had begun as Catherine's refusal, but by the next morning, it had become a palace-wide reckoning. By morning, the palace was no longer pretending nothing had happened. Breakfast trays moved through corridors with unusual silence. Staff lowered their voices. Doors closed faster than usual. And inside one private sitting room, Camilla sat alone with untouched tea. Realizing Catherine's walkout had not weakened the Princess of Wales. It had exposed everyone else. Catherine made the first move without raising her voice. She declined the scheduled joint appearance that would have placed her beside Camilla less than 24 hours after the walkout, and that refusal carried more force than any public speech. A joint appearance is when senior royals attend the same public duty together to show unity, calm, or support. That mattered because this appearance was meant to prove the family was steady. Without Catherine beside the queen consort, the message collapsed before it could even begin. William backed her at once. The prince instructed aides not to issue a forced unity statement because he knew those statements often bury pain under polite words. A palace statement is an official message released to guide public understanding, and in royal crises, it can turn private hurt into carefully managed language. But William refused to let Catherine's choice be softened into nothing. He had watched her leave that room with dignity, and he would not allow anyone to rewrite it as confusion. Camilla felt the consequence before the world heard the details. The queen consort sat alone, staring at tea she had not touched, knowing the cancelled appearance made her absence from Catherine impossible to hide. She had entered the meeting expecting her place to be restored. Now her place looked uncertain. Success had turned into exposure. Control had turned into isolation. And the silence around her felt colder than any accusation. Catherine remained calm, but the wound was real. In a private conversation recorded later in a documented palace account, she told William she could endure criticism, but not manipulation disguised as duty. The Princess of Wales had accepted pressure before. She had carried it quietly. But this time, the pressure had been arranged around her, and that changed everything. William heard the exhaustion beneath her restraint, and it hurt him more than anger would have. Charles asked for the revised program card from the earlier ceremony. The king stared at Catherine's missing name, then placed it face down on his desk, as if the paper itself had become unbearable. An aide noticed he did not defend the change. Instead, Charles asked who had authorized the final version and why Catherine had not been informed. The fallout had begun, but the real decision was still ahead. Before the palace could craft its version of events, William and Catherine had to decide what their own truth would be. The turning point did not come from a royal decree or a public announcement. It came in a private room, with no aides, no notes, and no one to translate pain into protocol. Catherine sat across from William, no longer angry in the way the palace expected. She was tired, and that exhaustion changed everything. William closed the door himself, because this conversation could not survive another witness. The prince had seen the palace machinery move too quickly before, turning hurt into phrases, turning silence into strategy, turning real pain into something neat enough for public use. Courtiers, the senior staff who guide royal schedules and messages, usually shape how conflict is handled before it reaches the outside world. But this time, William knew Catherine did not need a prepared response. She needed honesty from the one person who had promised she would not face the room alone. Catherine spoke with a calm that unsettled him more than tears would have. She told William the walkout was not a rejection of duty, and it was not a refusal to serve the family. It was a refusal to become a symbol of forgiveness she had not freely given. Public duty, meaning the royal work carried out in front of the nation through visits, speeches, and ceremonies, mattered because Catherine had always honored it. But she would not let duty become a chain around her dignity. William apologized before she had to ask. He admitted that he should have challenged the altered ceremony program sooner, and that he had mistaken restraint for protection. The prince had thought silence would stop the wound from growing. Now he understood silence had protected the wrong thing. It had protected the surface. It had protected the room. It had not protected Catherine. Catherine looked at him and said the words that changed the crisis. Silence had begun to feel like permission. William heard the weight inside that sentence. He understood that her exit had spoken in a language the palace could not soften. No statement could erase it. No aid could shrink it. No one could call it confusion when Catherine had made her meaning so painfully clear. William made his decision then. He would not attend another private family meeting unless Catherine received the full list of attendees and the full agenda in advance. An agenda is the written plan of what a meeting will cover. And in royal life, It can decide who holds power before anyone speaks. Catherine agreed to continue her duties, but only on terms that protected her from staged reconciliation moments. Their unity changed the balance. Once William stood firmly beside Catherine, the palace could no longer frame the walkout as an emotional overreaction. And when the story finally reached the outside world, the public did not see a small family disagreement. They saw a royal line being drawn. By the time the story reached the public, the image was already fixed in the national imagination. Catherine rising, Camilla entering, and a door closing before the room could recover. No palace statement could compete with that. The world did not need every detail. It understood the gesture. Something polite had finally become unmistakable. Catherine became the center of a storm she had never tried to create. The palace tried to soften the damage by calling the cancelled appearance a scheduling adjustment, but the phrase sounded too careful, too thin, too late. A palace statement is the official message used to guide public reaction. And this one mattered because it showed the family still wanted control, while the public had already chosen the image that mattered most. Catherine had walked out, and no careful wording could make that door open again. Camilla faced a different kind of exposure. The Queen Consort's defenders argued she had been embarrassed before the nation. But even they struggled with the altered program card from the Windsor Restoration reception. A broadcaster that evening framed the story bluntly, saying in a recorded segment, "This is no longer about one uncomfortable room. It is about who gets erased before the room is even arranged." That line struck hard because it connected Catherine's exit to something deeper than mood. It made the walkout feel like evidence. William watched the coverage with controlled anger. The prince did not celebrate public support because he knew Catherine's pain had become a national debate before she had fully recovered from it. Yet he also understood why people reacted so strongly. Catherine had spent years absorbing pressure with grace, and now many saw her walkout as the first clear refusal to be used as a symbol of forgiveness. William saw that the public was not only defending her, they were defending the right to stop smiling when respect had been taken too far. Camilla heard the headlines and felt the room close around her again. One London newspaper captured the public mood with a stark front page reading, "The Door That Shook the Crown," beside a simple illustration of an empty chair. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered quietly, leaving white flowers near the gates as a sign of support for Catherine's restraint. The gesture was gentle, but the message was sharp. Charles understood the danger better than anyone. The king knew public feeling could turn a private wound into a royal verdict. The story had escaped the room, escaped the statement, escaped every attempt to contain it. But beyond headlines and palace gates, the final meaning of Catherine's walkout rested in one painful truth no statement could erase. In the end, Catherine's walkout was not remembered as rudeness, rebellion, or weakness. It was remembered as the moment restraint finally reached its limit. She did not slam a door to destroy the family. She closed it to protect herself from a performance she could no longer accept. And that made the silence after her exit louder than any speech. Catherine had forced the monarchy to face a wound it could no longer hide. The crown, meaning the royal institution beyond one person, had survived scandals, rivalries, and public storms before, but this crisis cut differently because it exposed pressure inside the family itself. This mattered because Catherine was no longer just a graceful figure beside William. Her dignity had become part of how people judged the future of the monarchy, and any attempt to corner her now looked like an attack on that future. Camilla felt the consequence in a way protocol could not soften. The Queen Consort had entered that room believing authority could still demand acceptance, but Catherine had changed the terms with one quiet exit. She had not begged to be understood. She had not competed for sympathy. She had simply refused to sit inside a moment designed to make her surrender. For Camilla, that was the painful truth. Power had entered the room, but dignity had walked out. Charles understood the cost too late. The king saw that peace, built on silence, was not peace at all. It was pressure, wearing a polite face. William understood something just as sharp. The prince realized loyalty did not always mean staying seated. smiling carefully, or protecting the script handed down by others. Sometimes loyalty meant standing beside the person who had finally said enough, without needing to shout it. Catherine's final protection came through a private decision, recorded in a documented Palace account. No future family consultation involving her would happen without full transparency. A family consultation is a private royal meeting meant to discuss duties, tensions, or decisions before they become public. From that point forward, there would be no surprise attendees, no hidden agenda, and no staged reconciliation. Catherine would continue her public duty, but not as a symbol of forgiveness she had not freely given. Catherine returned days later with calm composure, and that calm carried the final verdict. The wound had not vanished, but the fear of being cornered had. Camilla had been confronted by a limit. Charles had been confronted by silence. William had chosen protection over performance. And Catherine had shown the monarchy a new rule. Duty without respect is not loyalty, and respect can no longer be demanded by simply entering the room. This was not the collapse of royal duty. It was the moment Catherine reminded the crown that dignity must stand before protocol. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.